Good afternoon and aloha. Welcome to our guests who are coming to this great several days of conferencing where it's intensely intellectual and also social. And as you heard from the very beginning, Hawaii is a very, very special place. And for me to return after 30 years and to the first time since I've returned in January to see the classic hula, I'm back. It's a great experience for me, and a particular honor, as Mary pointed out, to be the first former student to come back to be able to run the institution with this great team and a great legacy. Keynote is a bit overblown, perhaps. My job, I think, is to, in a few minutes to give me, we'll have some Q&A if you like, but just to raise a couple of things that might be worth some thought, because part of an opening address should be not just get out of the way so I can go eat and drink, but to really, I hope, to stimulate a few lines of conversation. It was mentioned earlier this afternoon about all the different countries from which our participants came this afternoon and for the next couple of days in this conference. But I read through the abstract and the booklet was given, and I think we'd all be delighted if you take the time to look that the issues that are being addressed by these graduate students are really issues that we are all concerned about. Health, aging, gender issues, economic change, culture and educational challenges, water quality and availability, pollution, traffic, climate change, carbon footprints, income discrepancies, on and on and on. But there's a good selection of these topics that dealt with in depth in the papers that are being talked about the next couple of days. And when I was thinking about what might be a useful point or two to make to kind of bring some discussions into focus, I came up with the idea of talking about smart cities, smart students, and tomorrow's jobs. And of course, when I first thought about this, I thought I was only going to be speaking to students. But there are a few people out here that are beyond their 40s, I see, and so are probably no longer active PhD candidates. But as I tell my own three sons, our family takes lifelong learning seriously, and so in many respects, we are all continuing students. So forgive me if I'm directing this to your graduate students kind of primarily, but I think you may find some resonance, generally speaking, at least I hope so. My 30 years in Asia, one of the things, I worked in Hong Kong, ran the American Chamber of Commerce, and there are those 1,700 members. Most had regional and global responsibility in multinational companies. Now, some multinational companies were very small. They're SMEs. There was consultancies are very small. But the people it was hard to have a meeting sometimes with people you wanted because many were on the airplane 2 and 3 weeks out of a month. So they're really, truly global executives involved in many, many important fields of endeavor. And also members of the chamber, we had NGOs, not-for-profits, educational institutions as well, because of the kinds of activities we were undertaking. And so, oftentimes in briefings for visitors to Asia and to Hong Kong in particular, people would ask, what's really happening in Asia that we should know about? And all that list that I've just read of the abstract topics are all those things that are on there. But one of the ones I think that does not get enough attention, and why I bring it up today, is how the world is being restructured by urbanization. When I was still in school, well, very early in school, in this case, in 1950, 30% of the world lived in urban settings. Fast forward to 2014, we're at 54%. And if things continue, because always, projections are always dicey, but some predictions at least looking at 66, 65, 66% by 2050. Now, why do I want to talk about this, raise it as a topic? We are all concerned with global issues, global concerns. We talk about them all the time. But when it comes down in the morning when you're brushing your hair, or in my case, just shaving, you have to ask yourself, okay, I take a lot of things seriously, but what can I do? What can the individual do about these major issues? And I would suggest that one of the interesting things about the shift of populations into cities takes, and you look at the problems of cities, that everything that we've listed off, health, aging, carbon footprints, and so forth, are concentrated as issues on the city level. And most of us live in cities. And so the issue becomes, no matter what course of study or education that we do, we have an opportunity in many of the jobs that we will select or continue to select as we move forward, to have a city environment where our expertise can be brought to bear on what would be defined as a city or urban issue, but really is a piece of the global action. And I think to look at that in that framework makes it less helpless. I remember when I was teaching at the University of Hawaii, if I assigned 500 pages of reading to my students on Monday for a Friday discussion, the chances are 95% would not even start reading because it was too much. Right? You needed bite-sized reading assignments to get things done and get discussion underway. And if we focus always on the macro level of global issues, there's an awareness that we develop, but there's not that awareness being translated into concrete action because it's just too huge. But you start looking at an urban environment or in a sub-community within an urban environment, suddenly those issues with which we may have interest or concerns are there right at our toe tips, pieces of the big issue. And so the excitement, I think, in the continuing education, whether we're undergraduates, graduate students, or adults trying to stay on top of things, is that we have the opportunity from our macro interest to scale down our concerns into individual action in an urban environment. And one of the things that when we talk about millennials in particular, people who grew up thinking that, well, as one of my kids did, went up as a 2-year-old, when he could finally stand up, went up and started tapping on the television screen to change the channel and was crying because it didn't respond. The millennials have grown up in the high-tech environment. And the interesting thing is that high-tech environment now has got, in a new trend, and a very small one so far, opportunities to bring the expertise of youth at very, very early ages, even prior to graduate school or undergraduate, to bring their expertise in technology to bear on global issues in an urban environment. And I'll give you just one example. My goal, of course, is to give you Google smart cities and see what I'm talking about. There are not too many really genuine cities of this sort in the world yet. Singapore is probably one of the better examples in Asia. There are a lot of attempts here and there. But let me just give you this one example of what I'm talking about, so it's clear, it's not so generalized. A company like Cisco goes into a city of, say, 350,000 people. And usually I've talked to the global head of IoT global director, Internet of Things global director. Here's what they do. They look for a city about that size, looking for a demonstration plot, basically. And they say, okay, we'll bring in and talk to a mayor who served only 1 year. So they got 3 years left, so it's early in the term. Say, look, we'll pull investors together to buy your streetlights and run them. Because streetlights is one of the most expensive budget items in a city. So let's buy it. And then they change all the bulbs and network the systems for dimmers and so forth based on movement in the city and so forth. So that it's cost-efficient. Investors, they pay a fixed rate at the old rate, no increase, but they make money by the savings they introduced. And then on all the light pylons, they install necessary equipment for wiring the whole city. So the whole city is networked. And then when that happens, that's where the app people get together. And everybody else can do wonderful things, like mounting on every bus a camera that's linked into the net. So if there's an accident or a double parked car or something of that sort, and information is sent immediately to a motorcycle policeman or an ambulance or whatever to get to the spot. Another one is we worry about aging. Me in particular, having now gone past 46. And one of the biggest worries, though, I think social worries that all of us have, and including Hawaii, is aged people living alone and street people. Now, there are privacy issues in some of this, but if you volunteer to wear a Fitbit-like a device, every aged person, if there is a heart flutter, it goes straight to the cloud, and the message goes out to the nearest ambulance in location, and it goes to the person in a smart city. Now, I'm just giving you two examples. You think of, metering for water, smart meters, smart traffic lights, on and on and on and on. Once you're wired, once you're networked in a city, for everything from e-commerce to e-government to you name it, can start happening. And the interesting thing is, it's all ages can be involved in the creativity of trying to make things work more efficiently. And so that's why I mentioned smart cities. I think there are not many of them yet, not even smart sub-cities or communities, but the wave is going to break soon. And I think the people in this room, all of us, have an opportunity to investigate some of this and to look into ways that might bring it about. Now, of course, smart cities don't just happen by themselves. It takes smart people. Of course, I mentioned smart students. And again, going back to my youth, I think I can remember. So going back to my youth, when I applied, when we got to advanced high school courses and the college, IQ was the big deal. IQ tests were the big deal. And then, of course, we know that IQ now is no longer sufficient. It gets you in the door, but you need to have EQ, emotional quotient, right? You need to not be a jerk, put a fine point on it, and to use technical language, right? But now we're in another phase. IQ is fine, EQ is fine, but now we have to have ICTQ, information communications technology. And that's not just knowing the technology and able to adapt to it. It's being able to explain to people who are older than you and not make them feel embarrassed. Because if you don't get up and down agreement and understanding of the latest advances in ICT technology and ICT developments, then you don't have collegiality, you have pushback, and people who are either being insulted or confused or frustrated or whatever. And so the people who are really catalysts in a work environment of any sort, be it academic, business, military, what have you, are the ICTQ people who can talk up and down laterally and have the EQ to do it without making people feel like jerks or idiots. And it's a really rare skill, still, to do it well. Anybody who has a person come into their office and explain in 33 nanoseconds how this thing works and walk out knows what I'm talking about. It takes a little different approach. So, my point on that is that smartness in this way is really very important. But there's another permutation. I would say there's a fourth category now that's also relevant to our topic. And that is now back to EQ on steroids. Because EQ, we used to think, would be just getting along with your peers in an office environment and so forth, being able to work together in a constructive and reinforcing way and so on. All that's true. But one of the East-West Center, we take a great deal of pride in the fact that everything we do is cross-cultural, cross-national, right? And this event is an example of that. But it's about time for us to start thinking about redefining the challenges of cross-cultural in a little different context. I ask to be introduced and mention the various jobs categories in which I worked for a reason. Military, academics, business, NGOs, think tanks, they all have their own cultures. They all have their own cultures. And every time I moved from one to another, I realized that all had skill sets and communication skills and EQ and all that kind of stuff. There was a different cultural environment. And frankly, I also learned to my shame really, that I was guilty for a long time of one particularly bad cultural silo. When I'm a history and philosophy major, which says there's some hope, I guess, for staying employed. But when I was in college, I thought people who majored in economics and business were losers. They couldn't handle they couldn't handle philosophy and history and mathematics, so they went to a business, which of course was a piece of cake. Wow, was I wrong, right? Oh, gee, was I wrong? And it took me a long time to find out. But when I did find out, I started looking in the mirror again when I was shaving. I'm thinking, Volstick, you were a jerk. You did not understand that the business culture, how important it is to, and what people in it think about, what they're trying to do, not only for their lives and their jobs, but in the community and so forth. And so I think we at the center put a lot of time in make sure we got people from different nationalities and from different cultures, different religions and so forth. But I think we're going to also start paying even more attention on the mix of employment sectors. Because the smart city that I was mentioning is not going to work unless the government, city government, and the academics, and the businesses, and the students, and if all work together and learn to communicate. And there are different languages between the sectors, just like there's different computer languages. So learn to be multilingual in the sector cultures is going to be an increasingly important thing, and especially as more and more people crowd into the urban environment. So my message is that EQ on steroids is really, really, really important. Finally, one more point. Going back to my introduction. All of us, when we applied for college, we were told by our counselors, fine, get good grades, do all this great stuff, really work hard and pick the right courses, make sure you have a couple foreign languages, all the stuff to get admitted to a good school. But that wasn't enough. Had to be in some clubs, had to do some volunteer work, these sorts of things. That's increased substantially. My 3 sons are really, big into various kinds of volunteer activities and clubs and so forth. It's part of their life. But then the question is, you get into college and you go on to graduate school. What about that aspect of your CV? Is that still important? We get so focused sometimes on the work environment, which is difficult, that we may do a club here and so forth, but where is the civic responsibility? Where is paying it forward come in? Where is it paying back to your community in some kind of constructive activity? How is that in a resume? And I would suggest, just like the learning curve of lifelong learning is a nonstop process, So is the process of finding, over time, various niches in the volunteer sector, in the civic responsibility sector. It may not be the same when you're 30 and when you're 40. It may change a lot. Or something may happen. You know, you give birth to a child who has autism. Or you have a good friend or a relative who has faced cleft palate situation. Or whatever. You know, there's so many worthwhile activities out there. And so I thought about this for years, and the briefings I've given the last number of years to visiting MBA groups. And here's why I mention it to you all today. Maybe you're different. But I asked these MBA groups to come in from Wharton and Harvard and Stanford and so forth. They're visiting Hong Kong as part of their Asia tour. And I say, you know, there was no free lecture here. I ask them a few questions on what they read and so forth. And I ask one more question. I say, how many of you are on a board of a not-for-profit organization or an NGO? You're an elite school doing terrific work, brilliant, you know. How many of you are on a board for an NGO? Rarely do a third of the people or a fourth of the people raise their hands. And so my message is very direct. Shame on you. Because if you're an accountant or in communications and marketing or in leadership development or whatever, there's an NGO out there that needs your service because they don't know how to balance their books. They don't know how to communicate what they're doing. They don't know how to raise funds. They don't know how to do all kinds of things, right? They need networks to be linked. So you've got an MBA, by gum, you should be finding one that fits your predilections. What's the fit? What are you concerned about in these global issues, right? But bring it down to you and your community. And if that happens, even without the network, it's still a smarter city. And so my charge to you to think about is that tomorrow's jobs are really today's jobs. How do I relate to my community in my workplace, but also in my social volunteer place? That I've got a interest and a curiosity to not think out of the box of an accountant or a business person or a think tank person or an academic, but not be in the box at all. Don't be boxed in by those kinds of parameters. To be flexible and curious and take risks, to do things with other sectors of business or academic or whatever sector of society that is different from your own, as well as finding ways for your own expertise to be used not only for your own personal, professional, and organizational success, but for the success of the community. And so when you're here the next couple of days, you know, learning about all these macro issues that people are addressing in these presentations, you know, I hope that a little bit of the time will be focused on, yes, I don't know squat about that, but I think maybe I should, because it will give me a role to play that's a little bit broader, a little bit more insightful, a little more impact, has more impact than what I can do, what I'm doing now. And if that works, then I think that's another little added perk to the conference residual, as you might say, or the evaluations that we can give afterwards, that it was time well spent together in your new ohana of East-West Center in Hawaii. So I welcome you. I hope you have a great time together. And not only you have a great time and learn things, but that you will stay connected. Once you're a grantee, you never know, you may come back and run the place, right? So just stay tuned and stay connected, and that's my wish for all of you. Okay? Thank you very much. I spoke a little bit too long, I'm sorry, but I would take maybe one or two questions, and then real quick, and then we got to get out and eat.
Yes, our dinner reception starts at 6, so we have a bit of time for the Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please, there are 2 mics in this room.
Great. Sorry. That was easy to answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to spoil that. I was curious about what your understanding was of the East-West Center's mission back when you were a student and what it is now, and has that changed through the decades? And one other thing with respect to urbanization, I'm less concerned whether it's inevitable. I wonder if it's desirable given some of the possible economic and environmental effects.
Yeah, let me answer the good questions. Let me answer the second one first. There are a lot of things going on that are undesirable, but they're going to happen. And so instead of trying to turn back clocks or trying to stop things that are kind of maybe mitigated somewhat, but I think the real issue is to be practical and do what we can, given the changes in structure of things, to make sure that we put our best brains and best actions to work to mitigate the negatives and accentuate the positive. On the East-West Center's mission and purpose, and I think that it's still absolutely consistent. You know, the original, in fact, the original name, or the full name of the East-West Center is the Center for Cultural and Technical Interchange between East and West. It's just shortened down to the East-West Center because that's too much to say at one time, right? Except when you're signing documents. And what's interesting, I think, to me is the one change I think may be a little bit different is that we started out with a lot more technical things in the early days because that was needed given the environment, especially in Asia Pacific, but also on some on the America side. And then we've moved a little bit away from that, but with the things I mentioned in conjunction with Smart City and all kinds of high-tech necessity, now we're moving back, I think, to including in the programs and activities we do a more attention to capacity building in these areas so that the kinds of things we undertake, whether in a short or long-term program, have more impact. But no, I think one of the joys that I've had since returning, I stayed in touch a little bit as an alumnus, but I was a long way away and didn't travel to Hawaii very often, is that the consistency of, you can study cross-cultural things, you can study international relations and so forth, but the center's real strength is that you live in an environment that has that every day. So the living in the dormitory, as I did part of the time, where, there's all this huge mix of people, eating and cooking and having a good time together, but also, as I did with many of my colleagues when I was a student, actually spent a lot of time in study groups together trying to pass our comps. That's an immersion, total immersion, a package deal. And another thing that my particular, is now also continuing, but may be augmented further going forward. Again, mentioned that I was not only a graduate student here, but I actually had contract positions at the East-West Center, but also taught as a graduate assistant, and then eventually later as an instructor at UH and Honolulu Community College and Chaminade University. The whole time I was a graduate student. And so, besides learning time management and multitasking, the advantage of that was that I was working with senior academics, and in the case of the East-West Center, senior researchers, in addition to my coursework. That still continues as well. And I think there's a package deal culturally and socially. There's also kind of an intellectual strength of the way this place operates, which I think is something that we should be proud of, not only back from the 1960s when we started, but through to today. Next question. Thanks for asking those. Sir, you look familiar. This is my boss, chairman of the board, and so I'm concerned about this question, frankly.
Well, I figure I have to help you out because we've got, or help the caterers out because we have some 25 minutes yet. Richard, great talk. Really an interesting talk. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to, return to your last life, and that was president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. I know you spent at least 8 years there. in that position. How is Hong Kong, you know, this huge megalopolis in the most populous, part of the most populous nation in the world, how are they doing in the smart city world, being, you know, 5 times, at least 5 times bigger than Honolulu? And second part of the question, as president of the Chamber of Commerce, where, you know, to some extent you're leading, assisting some of the largest business entities in the world, how did you assist in marshaling all of their fabulous resources to help build a smart city? And in other words, is there a way to get the large entrepreneurial enterprises involved in this process, contributing to this process, because they probably have more resources than anybody except for perhaps, you know, military institutions?
Okay. Good question. I didn't ask him to do this, but it's one of my favorite areas. I love talking about myself. No, that's right. Thanks. First of all, right now, Hong Kong is not a smart city. And in fact, the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong was driving that, being one of the drivers for do that. Singapore is. It was coming from the top down. The government saw the idea and decided that they were going to make, you know, Singapore completely cloud-based activities, and now doing all kinds of interesting things. But the fact, you know, again, when you meet, you convene organizations and activities. If you only convene people who have success, you don't learn as much as you convene people who have success and failure. In fact, failure is really important. I have a long experience of that myself, and it's always been kind of gratifying to kind of figure out what you did wrong and try to correct it going forward. And so what we've been doing in Hong Kong is to bring in people from the business sector and some of the government sectors to look at what needs to be done, what obstacles have to be overcome in order to get consensus in the city and also the initial decision-making through the government, city government, to really take the risk and make the investments, have the public-private partnerships and make it possible to do this kind of activity. Now, one thing I did not mention in my talk, but this gives me an opportunity to bring it up now, is that when you look at the global issues in the city context, in fact, there are a lot of business solutions to the problems we're all concerned about. We're seeing more and more of that happening, especially in the high-tech sector for connectivity and e-government, e-commerce, and healthcare systems and so forth are already moving quite radically around the region this way. But the interesting thing about Hong Kong is, by the way, it's 7.3 million people with an annual visitor number of 60 million. Now, a lot of those are day trippers, about half are day trippers. But any one time in Hong Kong, besides the stress on city space and facilities, you've got 300,000 to 500,000 people visiting in the city. And you talk about social disruptions and tensions and so forth, and try to mitigate those, given that high count, it's another issue that a lot of urban places are going to face. They may not come as visitors, but they may come as immigrants from the farms. You're going to have a lot of subsets, as we do here, from people from Micronesia coming in with very different culture, background, and skill sets, and trying to get them integrated into the Hawaii society is very, very difficult. A lot of cities are facing the same thing around the world. The interesting thing about Hong Kong is that it's going to be unique, I think, from almost any other smart city as they move that direction, because it's going to be more than a smart city. The transportation system, if you had a map of Pearl River Delta, there are 9 major cities in the Pearl River Delta where it surrounds the north, east, and west of Hong Kong. All those cities have been part of the Beijing's 12th and 13th 5-year plan to build those cities up to kind of major size cities as magnets for various kinds of developments in high tech and healthcare, tourism, and so forth. The interesting thing about that plan, though, is Macau and Hong Kong are not part of it. One country, two systems. So Hong Kong has its own plan. But the American Chamber in Hong Kong, we've been doing delegation trips to all these cities over the last 3 or 4 years, trying to see what their plans are and how their developments are going to integrate with Hong Kong, especially as we moved into this transportation network that will be done in about 2 years, which means that we can get from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, which is now 40 minutes in 12, and from Hong Kong to Guangzhou, the capital in the south, in 40 minutes instead of an hour and a half or 2 hours, and to Zhuhai across the water to the west by the Zhuhai Bridge in 40 minutes instead of an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so suddenly you have a 1 hour commute circle, which covers 122 million people, or 22 million people immediately, but then connectivity from there with roads and so forth to a much larger number. So it's not just 7 million population or 30 million, it's over 100 million, maybe 200 million connectivity within a commute range, not jammed like there are megalopolises in the States. You cross a street and you're from one city to another, but a lot of space in between. A lot of rural activity, tourist areas, mountains, all kinds of, but you can get there. And it's connected by Wi-Fi. And so we're seeing, and then right across, I mentioned Shenzhen. Shenzhen is now become, you all know Dongguan story, which was the manufacturing center in China, South China for global production. Now in Shenzhen, this little ex-fishing village, right across the border from Hong Kong, is now the IT Dongguan, the intellectual Dongguan of China. And so even though it's a Cantonese-speaking area, the lingua franca that's used in that city is Putonghua, is Mandarin, because they come from all over the country. That's the language they can use together. And so then looking at the synergies between, because it's, there's a rule of law in Hong Kong, there's not so much in China. You can do a lot of R&D and other sorts of things. But when you want to move to taking a product to market or innovative technology you want to patent and market and so forth, all that's done in Hong Kong because of the rule of law and the communications and marketing and financial services and all the other modern service industry capabilities are in Hong Kong. And so my line has been our line in the Chamber of Commerce has been, what we're looking at is the development of one megalopolis, two systems. Not just one country, one megalopolis, two systems. And if that works, we've got a bunch of cities that are interacting, they're competitive, of course, they want to get, they're competitive, but also they cooperate. What we've been calling co-opetition. It kind of mix. Competition is good, but cooperation is also good. You find the ways you can do a little bit of both. And if that template works over the next decade or so, I think it's a scalable one as far as mindset and attitude, maybe some of the processes for a lot of the city clusters we're seeing all over the world. Because to do that, you have to get, as I mentioned in my talk, the interaction across sectors. Business, government, NGOs, think tanks. And a lot of places, the NGOs hate the government. Government's afraid of the NGOs. Business is hated by everybody. And then, think tanks don't deal with, this. And it's really a lot of stovepiped activities. And what do you do? And there's a job overlay, too. What happens to the IT people in every government department when you're linked in the cloud? You only do one department. So a lot of IT people lose their jobs. But then the question is, there are a lot of NGOs and businesses and academic institutions that need IT people and they can't afford them or can't get them because there's a shortage. So the job distribution is going to change too. And so part of the narrative has to be, when you create jobs and you destroy jobs, what are the fallback positions for the ones who lose their job? A problem we've seen that is not just a U.S. problem, but a global one. So I think watching the smart city development, and Hong Kong is a special case, not there yet, is something that's going to be instructive for a lot of us. Long answer to a long question. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. I hope we have it on video so we can preserve the answer.
We have time for one more question.
One more question, I think. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. You want to sing in tandem? No, that's all right. Go ahead. Make it a short one.
Sure. How do you see Honolulu, in particular, moving toward a smart city, particularly informed by your Asian experience? And what is the role of yourself and the East-West Center in doing that?
Well, short answer to that one, then I can take your question, okay? Because I hate to cut you off. We heard earlier from Mary about the convening power of the East-West Center. And one of the things that do it is to get people to talk together about on the same page. If that doesn't happen, if people are at loggerheads on what needs to be done and what can be done, that's usually a communication problem. So we need to work on that. So will we get there? Slowly, I think, but it takes leadership, but it takes good followership too. There, yeah, quick on that and we'll go. Excuse me.
Seems to me that when we talk about smart city, it's about building infrastructure or system that ensures population's well-being. I wonder what you think about roles or space that
Rural space? I'm sorry, I can't hear quite. There is a microphone.
when we talk about smart cities, it
About
seems
what?
to me like we are talking about building system or infrastructure that like ensures like population's well-being. And I wonder, so like if we think about like as a student or in terms of discipline that can contribute to building smart city, do you think what roles or is there any room for art, like visual art or music that like they can play to contribute to this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll give you just a personal example. I done a lot of lecturing at Washington University, St. Louis, at the business school. My son also attended that university, and they had an alumni meeting in Hong Kong, not long before I came over here. 15 or 17 recent graduates, the last 3 or 4 years. They went around the room, they introduced themselves, and only 5 were working for companies. The rest of them were self-employed entrepreneurs. Very young, but they're all doing entrepreneurial sorts of things. I didn't want to, with the age expectation now, why would you want to start a job you're going to keep for 50 years, right? So they're sampling. They're sampling, trying to do things themselves, which I found very, very heartening. I've heard a lot about this. On the other flip side of the coin, to answer your question, we run 400 events a year at the Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong for 24 different committees doing information kind of related things and conferences and delegations and so forth. But one of the ones that has been very prominent as a topic over the last few years has been millennials in the workplace, hiring millennials. And I must say, the evolution of the perception of that has moved from gigantic pain in the neck to let's find as many as we can. The pain in the neck came as we don't want to work on regular work hours. We want to have time off to do volunteer work. How come this building's not green? How come we're not involved in decision making at the higher level? How fast can I get promoted? 2 weeks is too short, too long a time. That kind of thing, right? And so that was, I'm not exaggerating exceptionally much, I must say. But now what's happened is, and I think the ICT dimension has been part of it, but it's the idea that also at the same time this was happening, we moved from CSR, community service responsibilities of corporations, being something that would be good to do, and move from being just a philanthropic bunch of money for something to really getting the whole company involved in some kind of activities that would help the community. And so that CEOs of the best companies now, part of their evaluation is on their CSR, quality of CSR activities. In fact, it's not even called CSR activity. It's just not just ingrained in the best companies, but it has to be done. And a lot of the outreach for that, the people who really drive it effectively, again, are millennials, because they're kind of in touch with, this came out of that, in a sense, to the company. So I think, you know, the interplay between senior and junior members of organizations has been tremendous. Even the little one I ran in Hong Kong, you know, we wanted to increase our sponsorships, and we had all kinds of new high-tech stuff, communication stuff that we put on, we had available to on big data, or in my case, kind of big data, and I just had all the youngest people in the office get together, told them what we needed. Look, here's what we've got. How can we make it better using technology? And they had incredible ideas that we adopted, and now we were setting the standards for how to be pre-event, event, and post-event, give sponsorships their due. And so, you know, I'm a believer, and you know that the diversity that we talk about in the usual terms, the age diversity, you know, and experience diversity is not as big as it used to be. I mean, there's really learn up from the bottom and learn down from the top happening simultaneously in the best companies. And I think any institution, whether it be academic or think tank or military or whatever, has got to take that same thing on board. So I think it's becoming people are becoming more and more aware of it, certainly some of the people with whom I work, and I think it augurs well for the future. Back to the original question, there are a lot of things that are happening we may not like, but that doesn't mean we just have to roll over and play dead. You know, we can actually try to be proactive about addressing these things, and not just in the macro, let the government solve it, but start at our toe tips, try to do things ourselves and build momentum. Well, thank you for the time and listening. I appreciate it very much.